Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, let's talk Karl-Anthony Towns, trade talk again. There's a national rumor out there on Friday that the Wolves, many executives think the Wolves could look to trade him in the coming weeks. I'll break down why, and again, kind of the thought process behind why Towns may or may not be traded this offseason. Also, specifically, the idea of Atlanta and Houston and maybe a three-team trade, maybe directly to Houston. Could either one of them be Town suitors? We'll break it all down on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. A lot more cat potential trade talk in the show here today. I want to look at it from a very pragmatic view as the reasons why or why not the Wolves could trade Towns. And then also Houston and Atlanta, the Eric Pincus Bleacher Report rumor from Friday. We'll break that all down on the show today. First of all, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. This show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find this show. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. That's on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, so obviously have covered the Karl-Anthony Towns trade topic quite a bit here on the show. I still think it remains the most interesting undercurrent of the offseason next to it is the most interesting, just given the potential magnitude or the magnitude of any potential Karl-Anthony Towns trade. But obviously the Naz Reid free agency situation would be the other big question related to the Wolves offseason. I mean, there's a couple schools of thought here, right? So like just last week, I think we talked about John Hollinger's article on The Athletic about how the Wolves are one of the most quote unquote stuck teams because of their lack of future draft pick assets. And we dove into that a bit further on the show, talked about how actually they're not completely devoid of first round picks because you can't be, right? So they did, they have their pick next year. They have a couple swaps in there. They have a couple of extra second rounders. But there's also the idea that if the Wolves do anything, it's got to be something big, right? It would have to almost be a Karl-Anthony Towns trade. Really unlikely there's a Rudy Gobert trade. They're not trading Anthony Edwards or Jaden McDaniels. So the only significant move the Wolves could really make would be trading Cat. So it's kind of an all or nothing offseason, all being a massive Cat trade and nothing being nothing, beyond kind of backfilling those rotation spots that will be opened with Jalen Noel's free agency. And, you could swap out Taurean Prince with the non-guaranteed contract, looking for another backup point guard. There's certainly moves around the edges that could be made. But if anything significant happens, it would have to be a Towns trade. The reason why I think this continues to be a really important topic is because, and I've seen some stuff, Twitter, Wolves blogs, etc., just related to like, hey, do we really have to keep rehashing the rumors about Cat? Maybe he'll be available, that type of a thing. Well, I think it's important. I think it's really important because it'll give us further insight into Tim Connelly's mindset related to the Rudy Gobert trade from last offseason, right? So there's a couple possibilities here. Either Tim Connelly really, really, truly believed, and this is the most likely possibility, I think, that he wants that the two big thing is going to work, right? Rudy Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns. And he thought like, hey, this is the future. This is this particular pairing, add in Anthony Edwards and whatever Jaden McDaniels could become. Because remember, we're thinking 12 months ago now, everyone thought McDaniels could be a really good defender, but he was probably even better this year than people expected him to be. Connelly evidently, very likely, must have thought like, hey, this is a legit good pairing. We're gonna use this pairing for the foreseeable future. The cap stuff, depending on what the new CBA looks like, could get sticky in a couple of years. This is Connelly 12 months ago thinking about this. But let's take the swing. We think this will be big. We think we'll win 50 games, go to the second round, maybe go to the conference finals. Ant becomes a superstar. Like we'll figure this luxury tax potentially out if and when we get there. The other possibility is that Connelly potentially, and I'm not saying this is for sure the case, this is again a possibility, that he perhaps was expecting to trade Karl-Anthony Towns all along. And maybe for whatever reason, he was thinking, hey, Rudy's a better fit for Ant because, like he's a lower usage guy. The Ant Rudy pick and roll should be undefeated or unstoppable. Is a much better way to say that. Add in Jay McDaniels on the wing, and you've got this three crazy defenders with Ant, Rudy, and Jaden. And I can recoup most of these picks and maybe a young player to in exchange for Karl-Anthony Towns this summer, right? Summer of 23, before the 50 million kicks in next year, the 24-25 season. He's only paid quote unquote, only 36 million this year. Then the Supermax kicks in 4 more years on that deal, including the player option at the end of it. Those are the two possibilities. I think the first one's still most likely. Well, Connelly knew he could always pivot and trade Towns this offseason. If it was the second one, then obviously things did not play out either way, things did not play out how Connelly would have wanted them to, right? The team only won 42 games and stumbled into the 8th seed in the playoffs. And Cat only played 28 games, I think, 29 games. He missed 52 consecutive games in the middle of the season with the calf injury. So Towns' trade value is lower now than it was a year ago. And it's probably still higher now than it will be a year from now, because of the Supermax kicking in next year. Unless Towns becomes one of the top 5 players in the league this season, which, I mean, we haven't seen a fully healthy Cat with a great cast of characters really, in a while at this stage in his career. It's always possible, right? There could be one of those massive breakthroughs where he goes from superstar to super duper star. It's still possible, not likely, but unless he becomes like a top 5 player in the league, $50 million is going to be a lot for Karl-Anthony Towns next fall. And that would be a reason for his trade value to go down further. So it's already down lower than it was 12 months ago. It's going to go down again in the next 12 months unless he plays insanely well this year and is, again, top 5 player, first team All-NBA, whatever that might be. So Connelly's suddenly in a more difficult position than he thought he would be in. Because if the team had played extremely well and Towns had been healthy, he could have continued to move forward. He could have been like, all right, well, we won, 53 games and whatever, this worked. Or if the team struggled and Towns wasn't healthy, was healthy, say that it was the same season, but with Towns healthy completely, it's an easy pivot. It's, hey, Cat's still a really good player. He's healthy. And we could trade him for picks. I guess the other variable there would be then teams would say, well, is Cat actually good if you won only 42 games? So maybe the best case, if that was Connelly's plan, would have been the Wolves win, call it 46, 48 games, and it's a decent season. Towns is an all-star again, but still not quite maybe what fans would have expected after the Rudy trade. But now, because of the way things played out, the pivot becomes less attractive because of the injury. The Wolves would be selling low on Karl-Anthony Towns, trading him this offseason, and his value isn't what it would have been a year ago. But again, it's probably still higher right now in June of 2023 than it will be next offseason in June of 2024 because of the salary increase to $50 million in a year. So Tim Connelly is in a difficult spot because I tend to be in the camp of like, hey, you only gave this 29 games. Understand that there's going to be cap issues in a year, but you got to run it back. And if you have to trade Cat next offseason, fine, but you got to see if this experiment works. And if it does, then maybe, like, if it works really well, if this team wins 55 games next year, which would be a crazy improvement, then maybe you find some other ways to like, I don't know. I mean, either way, you're still going to sink your entire cap into your best 4 players because that's just how this is all played out with the new CBA too. Not that the Wolves couldn't have seen that coming. But I don't know. If all things are equal, I just think giving it another year makes a ton of sense. And you deal with the luxury tax if and when you need to. Well, not if, because you will in a year. But Tim Connelly is in a tough spot. And yes, it's mostly his own doing. But the idea of trading Cat is valid because of the luxury tax implications, even if it'd be really hard for them to trade Cat and still convince me that this roster is better after a Towns trade. Because Karl-Anthony Towns is still one of the 20 best players in the league when he's healthy, in a vacuum. And Anthony Edwards will be soon. If he isn't this year, it'll be very soon. Rudy Gobert is still probably a top 30 player even if it's in an unorthodox way, and he's maybe unpopular in a lot of ways, he's still really impactful. So how do you trade Cat and this roster actually improve? That's a really challenging thing for me to see. All right. I do want to talk about the actual trade that I want to talk about the rumor itself. I didn't actually read Pickus's rumor at Bleacher Report, so I do want to get into that. And then I want to talk about the trade suggestion that he gives, the potential 3-teamer with Houston and Atlanta. This isn't a specific rumor. It's what Pincus thinks could happen based on teams that could be interested in Cat. And then also, could the Wolves and Rockets work something out directly between the two of them if Houston's trying to lure James Harden back to Houston? So we'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at BetterHelp. Today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's so easy to get caught up in thinking about what everyone else needs from you and just never take a moment to think about what you might need from yourself. And honestly, mental health is something that, like, especially post-COVID, post 2020, that's when all that stuff became more forefront for me, or to the forefront of my mind. I mean, across the board, when you spend all your time giving it can leave you feeling stretched out and burned out. Therapy can give you the tools to find more balance in your life, to keep supporting others without leaving yourself behind. And that's where therapy comes in. If you're thinking of starting therapy, seriously consider giving BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your own schedule. And I mean, there's nothing better than that, especially if you need that flexibility. And, busy lives can a lot of times be part of that need to talk to someone, that need for therapy because of our busy schedule. So the flexibility is super important. You just need to fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. A reminder to the everydayers that this show is, of course, daily, and the draft is a week from Thursday. So we got to get into some more draft stuff. I'm going to talk a little about Houston today. If the Wolves did trade with the Rockets for the 4th pick, who could be on the board there? We talked about Scoot Henderson a couple weeks ago. If the Wolves were to trade with Portland for the 3rd pick, I want to talk about guys who could be available at 4 that the Wolves could look at. And then also we'll get to some second round conversations as well, because the Wolves do have that number 53 pick in the draft too. So we'll do all that here in the coming days. All right. Continuing the Cat trade discussion. Eric Pincus at Bleacher Report, who, is one of their writers who has a bit of is connected a little bit in the league, has some sources, and has, I don't know that he's broken very many stories, but has certainly had sourced reporting before. And so I think we do have to treat it with a little bit of, we have to take note of it, right? So the headline of this article is 2 3-team trades to make James Harden think hard about the Houston Rockets. There, of course, is reporting that Harden may be interested in going back to Houston, where, of course, he was traded away from a couple of years ago. And so there is a discussion about the Warriors here, and that's half the article. The other half of the article is about Karl-Anthony Towns as a potential target for the Houston Rockets. And I'm going to read a little bit of what he says, what Pincus says at Bleacher Report. He says, well, actually here, this is actually a pretty good example of why I'm going to tip my hand a little, because I think this trade, the 3-team trade at least, possibility is absurd. And I'll explain why in a second. But here's some context for where Pincus is coming from. He says, quote, "The Timberwolves had high expectations when it acquired Rudy Gobert from the Utah Jazz for significant draft capital, that it would be a strong playoff contender. Instead, they had to fight through the play-in to lose to the Denver Nuggets in the first round." Yeah, that's true. I mean, like that those two sentences are not wrong, but it also doesn't mention that Karl-Anthony Towns played 29 games and or 20, I think 28 games or whatever. Towns and Gobert played like 29 games together. He missed 52 straight with the calf injury. Doesn't mention that at all. So I don't know. That feels like it's a pretty important piece of context. Then he goes on to talk about the new rules, the CBA, with Edwards and McDaniels being extension eligible this summer. Edwards wants a max. He says many around the league believe he'll get it. Obviously he will. And then he says McDaniels is seeking closer to $25 to $30 million starting salary. He says the team won't be able to afford that, with Towns and Gobert combining for over $90 million next year in 24-25. Basically, you won't get as much to trade Gobert as you would to trade Cat. Then he says, quote, other competing executives think Karl-Anthony Towns will be long gone ahead of the 24-25 campaign. That, of course, is a year from now. Then he says, quote, some even believe Minnesota would jump at an opportunity in the next few weeks. The team's most significant need is a point guard to replace Mike Conley, who is very good for the team after a deadline deal, but will be 36 before the start of next season. He talks about Scoot Henderson being there at number 4. The Wolves could, likely going at 3, so he wouldn't be there at 4. And basically, the Wolves would need to get to 3 if they wanted Scoot Henderson. Then he goes on to talk about Atlanta. Atlanta has their own issues, which I would argue, or actually, I talked about this last week. I think the Hawks are actually in a worse place than the Wolves are in terms of cap and unflexibility. So then he goes on to suggest a 3-team trade between the Wolves, Hawks, and Rockets. He suggests that the Hawks could get Kevin Porter Jr. The Hawks could get this whole thing is so convoluted. I'll hit the actual, I guess, I don't know, cliff notes is the right way to say this. But basically, Kevin Porter Jr. and the 4 pick could go to Atlanta. The Rockets could get Towns to pair with James Harden. And then the Wolves would get Dejounte Murray and Jabari Smith Jr., of course, last year's number 2 pick in the draft, I believe. So the Wolves in this scenario wouldn't get any picks back. They would get Dejounte Murray and Jabari Smith. And the Hawks, again, get number 4 from Houston, and the Rockets would get Towns, and the Hawks would get Kevin Porter. The Wolves, to be clear, the Wolves were interested in Dejounte Murray apparently last offseason. They were rumored to be interested in trading for him from San Antonio before they sent him to Atlanta. This was in the days before the Wolves landed Rudy Gobert. I don't think Dejounte Murray is a fit in Minnesota. And I would not trade Karl-Anthony Towns in a deal that brings Dejounte Murray and Jabari Smith back, especially if there's no picks involved. I don't like the Murray fit for a couple of reasons. One, he's high usage guard, ideally a point guard. He played off the ball a lot more in Atlanta, obviously with Trae Young. He basically ran the show in San Antonio the first 5 years of his career, and when he was an all-star in 21-22. And he's a good defender, really good defender. But he's a high usage ball, a point guard who wants to control the ball. And then now you're taking the ball out of Anthony Edwards' hands. It's essentially what the problem was with D'Angelo Russell on the team, right? D'Lo is a shoot first guy, was actually a relatively efficient scorer at times. I would argue Dejounte Murray is less efficient than D'Angelo Russell. The advantage is, and I would probably say in a vacuum, Dejounte Murray is a better player than D'Angelo Russell. But the fit with Minnesota, I would argue D'Lo would actually be a better fit on the Wolves than Dejounte Murray because they're both higher usage, but D'Lo is a much, much, much better 3-point shooter. He's a better catch and shoot guy. You could argue he's a better pick and roll guy. So yeah, you help your defense, but is that what the Wolves need now? They're already, again, a top 10 defense. They're going to be a top 10 defense pretty much regardless of who the point guard is, as long as it's somebody that's a little more competitive defensively than D'Angelo Russell was, because you have Ant, you have McDaniels, you have Rudy, and then you get to mix in some of these other guys. If it's Taurean Prince or Nickeil Alexander-Walker, like they're going to have other guys that are average or plus defenders. The Wolves are going to have a fine defense. Point of attack defense in the point guard position is nice. Like what Mike Conley can do as essentially a slightly above average defender at this point in his career is really nice. But you can't have a score first point guard who's not efficient and plug him in next to Anthony Edwards and take the ball out of Ant's hands. At that point, you might as well have D'Angelo Russell, who at least can be an efficient scorer at times, can get hot. Dejounte Murray is not that. Last year in Atlanta, Dejounte Murray had the worst free throw rate of his career. He shot the ball less at the rim, or I guess the second worst free throw rate of his career. He shot the ball less at the rim in terms of his number of attempts than he has at any point in his career. And he shot more and more and more threes, but he only shot 34% from the arc. He's a 33.5%, well below league average career three-point shooter. He doesn't get to the line enough. And again, played off the ball last year next to Trae Young. Does not add anything to the Timberwolves offense. And the other problem is his contract situation. He's a free agent after next year. So you're essentially in the same spot you were with D'Lo at this time last year. The difference obviously being D'Lo's a few years older, and this would be it's one extension difference, right, between Murray and where D'Lo was. But now you've kicked the can, and you're still acquiring a guy who there's a question mark about Mike Conley after next year. Obviously, he's much, much older. But like, you don't have Murray under contract either. So you still have to extend Dejounte Murray. You might get out of your cap money. You get out of the Supermax, but you still have to pay Dejounte Murray probably more than he's worth as he enters his prime years. He's only had one legit all-star caliber season. He has only made one all-star team. But besides last season, he's just a nice starter. Like, there's nothing else about Dejounte Murray's game that screams, oh, yeah, he would fit well next to Anthony Edwards and would be worth giving up Karl-Anthony Towns for. I think the Wolves would 100% be better standing pat and figuring out a different solution, maybe paying the luxury tax for one season and figuring out a solution before you pay the repeater tax, than they would be to trade for Dejounte Murray in a situation like this. I want to talk a little more about this. I want to touch on Jabari Smith and also the possibility of, could the Wolves trade with the Rockets directly, cut out the Hawks completely, and not even discuss Dejounte Murray? We'll close the show by talking about that. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Prize Picks. Every day of the finals, which I guess I'm recording this before game 5, so may not be for much longer, but every day of the finals, one Prize Picks user will win a chance at becoming a millionaire. One entry placed after 8 a.m. Eastern, that's 7 a.m. Central, will be randomly selected each day. Whoever placed that entry will be given a 6-pick flex with the following payouts. 6 correct picks are $1 million, 5 correct picks, $80,000, and 4 correct picks, $16,000. Full details can be found at prizepicks.com/million. You must opt in at that link to be eligible for the $1 million entry. Once you opt in, all you have to do is play the game like normal, and you could be the lucky winner. If you're not familiar with Prize Picks, it's really easy to play. You just pick 2 to 6 players, and if they'll score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against other people either. You're just competing against the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. Of course, that includes the NBA. Also, baseball, hockey's nearly over, but hockey, golf, college sports, you name it, they have it at Prize Picks. You can make your entry in less than 60 seconds. Just download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, they'll give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code locked on at sign up. Again, the promo code locked on at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. All right, a little bit more on this Rockets, Hawks, Wolves discussion that Eric Pincus at Bleacher Report started on Friday. So I talked already about Dejounte Murray. He's just not a fit with the Wolves. I don't like it. Yes, he's a good defender. It would be fun to have so many good perimeter defenders, but the offense, he's going to want the ball in his hands too often. And as a secondary scorer, I don't like that option. I mean, the Hawks had a good offense this year, but I mean, that wasn't necessarily because of Dejounte Murray. Yes, I know he averaged 20 a game, but again, the shooting numbers are not efficient. Less attempts at the rim, less efficiency from deep, less free throw attempts. It's just not, it doesn't make sense for the Wolves. Obviously, Jabari Smith is attractive as a prospect, and there's a lot of defensive potential, well, a lot of potential on both ends of the floor with Jabari Smith. He had a decent rookie season. He did only shoot a little over 30% from deep. And but again, the defensive potential, I think, is what would excite me the most about Jabari Smith. But like, for a win now team is a 20-year-old who didn't score efficiently last year and was spotty defensively. Does that do much for you? I think the answer is no. And that kind of takes us into the conversation of, do you make a direct trade with Houston and get number 4? Well, first of all, I don't think they're going to trade Jabari Smith and number 4 for Karl-Anthony Towns. Even if they did, now you're getting back 2, 19, 20, 21-year-old type players and trying to win with 21-year-old Anthony Edwards and 30, 31-year-old Rudy Gobert. Like, it's just a weird, like, now why did you make the Rudy trade in the first place, right? Like, it's just, at that point, you have such a young roster. I don't think it's anything the Wolves would really entertain. And if you leave Jabari Smith out of it, say the Rockets say, hey, you can have the 4, but not Jabari Smith. I mean, that's probably what I'd be okay with that if I'm the Wolves. You don't want Kevin Porter Jr. I don't think he does much for me either. I don't know. Is he really your point guard of the future? No, I don't think that would make a ton of sense if you're the Wolves. I mean, he shot nearly 37% on, a lot of volume last year from 3, but And, he's a solid defender. Like, there's things to like. I think he's improved. I don't know that the ceiling is anywhere near what I thought it was when he first came into the league, but that doesn't do much for me. I like Tari Eason a lot. I liked him a lot as a draft prospect, but are you trading Karl-Anthony Towns for the 4-pick Tari Eason? And I mean, you'd have to match a bunch of salary too, right? So there's be a lot more involved. I just don't know how Houston could come up with a trade. And again, if you're the Wolves, do you want to take back a bunch of 21-year-olds for Karl-Anthony Towns and then just kind of hope that these pieces fit well with Ant? It doesn't make any sense. The team would not be better. And by making that Rudy trade last year, if you're the Wolves, you're saying you're ready to win now, right? Like, why else would you make that trade? So it doesn't make any sense to then trade one of your best 2 players, and I would still argue their best all-around player in Karl-Anthony Towns as of today, trade him for a bunch of young assets. It just makes no sense. That's why I go back to what I've said all along, which is I would play the season out if you're the Wolves with Towns. Figure it out as you go along. If the season's awful, you can always trade Towns next summer. Yeah, I know his value may go down a little because of the cap number, but maybe he has a good enough individual season. It doesn't hurt that much. And if it works, you just got to get creative. You got to just figure out, to make the cap numbers work moving forward to make sure you're not in the repeater tax. I don't know what that is. I don't know how they do it. You're basically going to be you just have a bunch of minimum deals, I guess, is where you're at. I talked about this a little bit. I think it was the start of last week, but that's still better than hitting the reset button and just praying that Anthony Edwards is a generational player. And yes, he has the ability to be that, but it's still not, it's still a roll of the dice. You still don't know. If Anthony Edwards doesn't become one of the best 5 players in the league in the next couple of years, now what? You've reset everything for really no reason. And that's why I still lean on the side of the Wolves won't trade Towns. I don't think they should trade Towns. I think Conley would have had to think about this a few steps in advance before he ever made the Rudy trade in the first place. I said this on the show, I think a couple of weeks ago, and I'll stand by it. I think it's a 75-25 that Towns is on the Wolves opening night next year. 75% chance he's in a Timberwolves uniform, 25% chance he's traded, which is obviously a real chance. And they will explore it. And we're going to hear tons of rumors, probably some legit rumors about specific teams and potential returns in the coming weeks. Reminder, it can't officially happen until July 7th, but obviously trades can be agreed to in advance. And so we're going to start hearing about this or we're going to keep hearing about it. I think more specific ideas in terms of suitors for Karl-Anthony Towns. It doesn't mean he's going to be traded, right? Like 97% of trade rumors that get leaked, 97% of trades that get discussed never happen, which includes a lot of trade discussions that are leaked. So we're going to hear a lot of it. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen, but it also gives us some interesting discussion topics for the offseason. All right. We will do more draft this week and next week. I promise we're going to get to that. I do think it's important to take this a step further. The what if the Wolves get 4, like we did with Scoot at 3 a couple weeks ago. And then also what could the Wolves look to do at the 53rd pick in the draft, that second rounder that they have as well. All right, that's all we have for you today. A big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch the show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.